Welcome back to Hot Air with me, Joshua Robert, and it's December, which means only one thing. Jesus is about to celebrate his birthday. And after October's debauchery, where I went full on celebration of all things satanic, I'm thinking it's time to pivot. Okay, let's try to be holy, or at least as close to sin free as I'll ever get, which is basically a hot mess in a sparkly robe. And now, before anyone panics, let me be clear. I am all about religious freedom. Believe what you want, worship who you want, wear a halo, horns, or none of the above. Facts are facts, though. And being aware of history behind your God and being educated about the texts that you follow actually shapes how you practice your religion and how you treat other people. This episode is not meant to offend anyone. Seriously, it is not meant to hammer down on the Bible thumpers who I call out quite often. This is an exploration of Jesus in the Bible. But let's face it, okay? Some people weaponize their God to hate the LGBTQ plus community. We see it basically every day. And if you're religious and listening, the last of your worries should be my perspective. This is just me giving you the cold, hard truth, a little bit of sarcastic commentary included, about how the Bible has been rewritten, mistranslated, and manipulated over centuries to create narratives that were not originally there. It's going to be a wild ride through scripture, scandal, and, like I said, sarcasm, all while keeping an eye on history, context, and yes, a little bit of Jesus' birthday spirit. But the Bible, as we know it, is essentially the longest running group project in history. And you know what happens with group projects? There's always one person who actually tries, a few people who don't show up at all, and someone who goes in at the last minute and changes everything for absolutely no reason. I hated group projects, and I probably will until the day that I die. And that last person who popped in at the last minute to change everything was basically every king, politician, and religious leader since, forever. The Bible was not handed down as one neat, finished, leather-bound, gold-page masterpiece like something you bought at a Barnes & Noble for $19.99 with a free bookmark included. It started as a bunch of oral stories passed around, translated through multiple languages, copied by hand, which alone is terrifying because have you seen some people's handwriting? Edited by councils, approved by kings, modified for power, and then printed and reprinted to match whatever vibe the empire needed at the time. And somehow, somewhere along the way, queer people ended up being the villains of a story they were never even originally a part of, which is absolutely wild because if we're being honest, the Bible is full of murderers, incest, cheating, prostitutes, also known as sex workers in modern day, corrupt rulers, and one very dramatic guy who lived inside a giant fish. But the thing that really enraged people centuries later was two men minding their own business. Make it make sense. You probably can't. Well, actually, you probably can, because that's what we're doing in this episode, making it make sense. Now, before we do make it make sense in this giant ass episode about the Bible and Jesus, why don't you follow me on Instagram and TikTok at _hotairpod? And you can submit your listener stories, topic suggestions on my website, hotairwithjoshuarobert.com. And since it's December, we're getting into the season of giving. I mean, I think gift giving is probably my main love language. And what's the other one? Is it acts of service? That sounds a bit too sexual. Is it acts of service? You know what I mean. Anyway, you can shop my merch also on my website, hotairwithjoshuarobert.com. I'll probably be uploading a few new things over the coming weeks, usually ships and gets right to your door in a week. We've got cute mugs, tumblers, stickers, t-shirts, hoodies. I think that's it for now, but who knows? I'm always adding things on there. But if you're in the mood to support the show and give the gift of hot air, feel free to go shopping. And now, let's dive into the meat of this episode. Let's hit it. Now, quick little story time before we continue. on this journey. I always think about the Bible and I say to people, I'm like, watch, in a few hundred years, maybe 1,000 years, people are going to think Harry Potter was real because likely that will be translated or recreated or updated. And people are going to look back and think that fucking Voldemort was Satan and Dumbledore was God. Like, that's the way I look at this stuff when I'm like, things get so misinterpreted over time. So, I mean, Harry Potter as a religion would be kind of fun, but I digress. My second point here is that I was at dinner the other night with my friends, the Michaels. Shout out to the Michaels. And one of them said Jesus H Christ. And then we got on the topic of what does the H even stand for? Like what's Jesus's middle name, right? And so quick Google search while we're sitting there at dinner, and it was simply a mistranslation a gazillion years ago. And there is no H in Jesus's name, but it's one of those things that stuck for thousands, hundreds and thousands of years. And essentially, I could stop the episode there. One thing gets confused, however many hundreds of years ago, one thing gets mistranslated, and it sticks forever. That's really all you need to know. And that's what we're going to cover in much more depth in this episode. And so when that happened at dinner, I was like, okay, I definitely need to do the episode about these mistranslations, about how things get twisted and misconstrued and kind of manipulated to suit certain people's narratives. So let's continue with the Jesus H. Christ of it all. Here's what a lot of people don't realize. The earliest versions of the Bible were written in Hebrew, Aramaic, and Greek. Those languages do not have modern concepts or sexual orientation. They don't even categorize identity the way that we do now. The idea of being gay or straight is very recent in human history. Back then, it was more about dominant and submissive power roles, social order, ritual purity, and inheritance lines. Nobody was out there like, hello, I'm Brandon, and I'm homosexual. That wasn't a thing. They didn't have Tinder profiles, they didn't have a pride flag, they didn't even have good plumbing. So when modern translators tried to go back and reinterpret ancient texts, they were trying to force a modern understanding of sexuality onto an ancient world that did not operate the same way. That's like trying to explain TikTok to a medieval farmer. He's just trying to survive the winter, and you're like, so there's this dance that we all do, and it goes viral. That gap, that misunderstanding, that is where the mess started. It's kind of like in therapy, or the way you view yourself is what you're going to project onto other people, right? If you are frustrated with someone because they are being inconsiderate and you get mad, usually it's a reflection of times that you've been inconsiderate. So it's pushing your own narrative upon others. And let's talk about the big verses that people love to scream from the rooftops. You know them. You've heard them. They show up in comment sections like a bad sequel and show up in my comment sections all the time telling me to repent. The famous one in Leviticus that in many modern Bibles reads something like, "A man shall not lie with a man as he would with a woman." Simple, right? I can see how that would be a no homo. But let's unpack that. In the original Hebrew, the word used there does not translate directly to homosexual. What it references is actually tied more to ritual impurity and specific acts tied to power and dominance, often in abusive or exploitative contexts. Some scholars believe that it referred to temple prostitution, ritual sex acts, abusive power dynamics, or incestuous relationships. It was not about two adults falling in love, adopting a dog, and arguing over where to eat dinner. That is not the vibe here. And yet, modern translations took a very specific, culturally bound prohibition and turned it into God hates gays, which feels kind of like a big jump from like no incest and no power dynamics that are unhealthy to God hates gays. Interestingly enough, the word homosexual did not even appear in any English Bible until, drumroll please, 1946. Let me say that again because it's important. 1946. That is wild. That means for over 1900 years of Christianity existing, there was no mention of homosexuality in the Bible. None, zero, zilch, nada. Not one letter H, not one rainbow acronym, not the mention of homosexuality. And then suddenly, mid 20th century, oh my goodness, homosexual suddenly appears. So, what happened in 1946? There was a group of American translators working on the revised standard version of the Bible. They came across a Greek word, arsenokoitai, or something of that nature. That word is rare. It's not used often anywhere else, and it's a compound word that roughly means something like male bed. Scholars are still not totally sure what it was intended to describe. Could be male prostitution, could be sexual exploitation, could be something tied to abuse, could be something tied to economic control. As I said, they don't really know. Male bed. Maybe they had beds back then that only men could sleep in. Who the hell knows? But instead of translating it cautiously, they chose the word homosexual, a word that had only recently been coined in the late 1800s in psychology and medicine, a word loaded with political and cultural baggage. And that one translation choice changed everything. Later, some of the same translators actually admitted that it was a mistake. They acknowledged the word was too modern, too specific, and too inaccurate. But by then, Christianity had already picked up that word and ran with it like a baton in the oppression Olympics. And you know, they won first place. Once you put something in the Bible, people treat it like it fell straight out of the sky, on a cloud, next to an angel named Steve. Like, it is what it is. That is fact. There is no room for interpretation, depending on how deep in your religious belief you are, of course. And from that point on, the queer community had a target painted on them, and not by God, not by Jesus, but by translators sitting in a room with their own personal beliefs, political pressures, and cultural biases. You were not condemned by the heavens for being a homosexual. You were condemned by a committee, and highly likely a committee of all straight men, I would imagine, which is honestly even more insulting. Now, let me say something that really makes people uncomfortable, okay? Jesus never once mentioned homosexuality. Not one time. Not a whisper, not a side comment, not even a parable. He talked about love, he talked about compassion, forgiveness, poverty, judgment, hypocrisy, greed, kindness, power, ego, money, violence, oppression, all of the things that highly likely we can get on board with understanding. But those are actual problems. But somehow today, people who claim that they are Christ-like are obsessed with policing who you sleep with. Sir, Jesus was flipping tables in temples, and you're flipping out over a Grindr profile picture that you are highly likely ogling over and drooling over. Now that is some craziness. We know the far right love to love Jesus, and they also love to love ladyboys. Okay, we've heard a lot about this lately. And there's nothing wrong with that, but I understand why very religious people obviously are not comfortable, I guess, embracing their sexuality. Religion became less about spirituality and more about control, especially when it came to sex. Because if you can control what people do in their bedrooms, what they do with their bodies, and how they express love, you pretty much own them psychologically. That is not religion. That is marketing. That's manipulation. That's emotional blackmail in a robe. Perhaps a sparkly white robe like Jesus might wear. And the queer community became the perfect other, a scapegoat, a distraction, an easy target to unite people against instead of addressing real sins like greed, corruption, war, environmental destruction, and the fact that some of these mega church pastors have private jets while their followers cannot afford groceries. Which I just know Jesus would have loved that. Now, look at me. I forgot to say part one when we started part one, but that was part one, and we're going to move on to part two, from ancient text to modern hate, how scripture became a weapon. If I'm being totally honest, the church has always needed a villain. Throughout history, it's been women, scholars, witches, other religions, different races, and eventually, us, the queers. The glitter demons, the rainbow agenda warriors who apparently have meetings every Tuesday, wink, wink, see you next Tuesday, where we plan the downfall of heterosexuality. If that was the case, y'all heteros would have been done a long time ago because the gays are powerful, okay? And if we did have secret meetings, they would at least be catered better than a church buffet, okay? When Christianity spread across Europe, it merged with political power. Kings used the Bible as a law book. Empires used God's name in justification for colonization, slavery, and violence. It wasn't just a spiritual text anymore. It became a legal, social, and political control manual. So when European powers moved into other parts of the world, like Africa, the Americas, part of Asia, they didn't just bring soldiers and trade, they brought Christianity. And with it came a rigid, binary, extremely European view of gender and sexuality. Before that, many cultures had multiple gender identities, open expressions of sexuality, revered two-spirit people, and fluid roles in society. But Christianity flattened all of that. Man and woman, husband and wife, and anything else was sin. I talk about that in a previous episode celebrating Transgender Awareness Week, so you can go listen to that episode. I think it's maybe about 4 episodes ago, 4 or 5 or 6, who knows, but you'll find it. But I talk all about what trans looked like through history, through different cultures and religions. It's quite eye-opening. So, not only did the Bible not originally mention modern homosexuality, the hatred of it was exported and globalized through colonization. A lot of homophobia that we see today in other countries is actually a leftover effect of Western Christian colonization. It's not even indigenous to those cultures. It was introduced as part of civilizing them. Like, how dare we, white people from Europe, we're going to go civilize you, completely change your religions based on what we think, based on what the kings think that you should believe in so that we can control you. Like, really gets under my skin. And it is a whole nother level of messed up. And now, here we are, centuries later, still cleaning up the trauma of it all. The fact that centuries later, we are still trying to figure this out is crazy. I think what hurts most is that so many queer people grow up believing that God hates them. They think that something is wrong with them. They think that their natural feelings are evil. They try to pray it away. They try to date the opposite sex. They try to change themselves. They feel shame and they feel broken over a book that wasn't even translated correctly to begin with. That's not just a mistranslation. That is generational trauma created by bad editing. And that is what we're really talking about here today. Not just religion, not just history, but impact. The PTSD, the internalized homophobia, the self-hate, the fear, the family rejection, the conversion therapy, the suicides. All because a handful of men in history decided their interpretation of God was more important than someone else's right to exist. And honestly, that is some villain behavior. Jesus would not be fucking with that. And sometimes I wonder what my religious exploration or relationship with religion would be like if this was not the case. But here's the part that I want people to hear. You are not wrong. You are not broken. You are not sinful for loving who you love. You are not condemned by God. If you are someone listening who is part of the LGBTQ plus community or questioning or figuring yourself out and you are scared because you think that Jesus doesn't love you or will not love you or that you are sinning based on your feelings or attraction to whomever, that's not fact. That is not what Jesus preached. It is simply a translation from the 1940s to make you easier to control. You were essentially rewritten by humans. And if humans can rewrite a text to include hatred, you can rewrite your own story to include love. Now, I'm not saying we have to throw the Bible away. I'm not saying people can't be Christian and queer. I'm not saying that spirituality is bad. I actually think spirituality can be really beautiful. It can be healing. It can be personal, expansive, and it can be very, very gay. But maybe it's time we stop letting a misinterpreted, politically motivated, male-dominated rewrite of ancient texts decide our worth. Maybe we get to decide that. Maybe God isn't in the specific words. Maybe God is in the intention of love. And if that's true, A whole lot of people have been doing this whole Christianity thing very wrong. Part 3. The verses they use against you and what they actually mean. All right, let's do the part that everyone loves to skip over in church because it requires reading or context or critical thinking. 3 things that tend to cause a mild allergic reaction in certain religious circles. There are only a handful of verses in the entire Bible that people use to justify homophobia. Out of a book that has over 31,000 verses, they cling to like 6 lines and build an entire hate campaign on them. Imagine if your whole personality was based on an Instagram caption from 2012. That's the level of BS that we're dealing with. We already talked about Leviticus. That one gets whipped out constantly. Whipped out. Usually by people who have never actually read the rest of Leviticus, which is fun because Leviticus also says that you cannot wear clothes or mixed fabrics. You can't eat shellfish. You can't shave your beard. You can't get tattoos. You can't eat pork. You can't sit where a menstruating woman has sat. That would mean we'd all be standing up forever. And that is just to name a few things from Leviticus. So if we're following Leviticus literally, a lot of people from TikTok to the church choir are in deep, deep sin. You're all in trouble, essentially. But for some reason, they skipped the no bacon verse and decided to laser focus on gay people. Again, interesting choice. Now let's move to Sodom and Gomorrah. This one gets real dramatic. This is a story where 2 angels visit the city of Sodom. Sodom. I'm going to say Sodom. And the men of the city want to have sex with them. And people go, see, God destroyed a city because of homosexuals. Except that's not even the primary sin in the story. I'm already confused. I don't know about you. The sin of Sodom was actually about hospitality violations, violence, inhospitality to strangers, abuse, and sexual violence. The men weren't just like, oh, hi, we're in love with these angels. I kind of feel weird saying this, but the men literally attempted to gang rape these angels, okay? And that was not consensual, as it may be in a Grindr meetup. This is really a crime. And using that story to condemn LGBTQ people is like using a story about bank robbers to say that everyone who owns a wallet is corrupt. Or everyone who wears a ski mask is going to rob a bank, like even when they're skiing. In fact, in the book of Ezekiel, which people conveniently ignore, it literally spells out what the sin of Sodom was. And guess what it says? It says Sodom's sin were pride, gluttony, laziness, and neglect of the poor and needy. But no one's preaching sermons about that part. I mean, they are, but whatever. Of course, they're not as focused on that as they are about the homosexual part of it, because that would hit a little too close to certain modern lifestyles, wouldn't it? So, Sodom and Gomorrah, not a gay love story, a violent, abusive, corrupted city story. Next up, the verses in Romans and Corinthians. These are the New Testament ones that modern Christians cling to because they think it makes them sound more, well, official. These passages are written by Paul, not Jesus, and Paul was, how do I put this kindly? Very dramatic, very intense. Everyone sit down, I wrote some letters kind of energy, so highly likely he was a homosexual. The Greek words used in these passages, again, are arsenokoitai and malakoi. Let me clear my throat. Malakoi literally translates to soft. It was used in ancient times to describe men who were lazy, who lacked discipline, or who were morally weak. It was not inherently sexual. It was more of an insult, like being called a soft boy in the ancient world. Like, you got no backbone, you lazy, get off your mom's sofa and go get a job. Arsenokoitai, as we talked about earlier, is a rare word that likely referred to exploitative sexual relationships, possibly between slave owners and slaves, men and boys, or people using power to abuse others. None of this is describing a loving, committed, equal, consensual relationship between 2 adults. But that's what modern translators decided that it meant, because it fit their agenda and it made a convenient villain. And then they preached it. They taught it. They passed it to their children. They filed it under God says, and nobody bothered to check the footnotes. And this badly translated, politically influenced interpretation became the moral cornerstone of LGBTQ plus oppression for centuries. Not because the Bible demanded it, but because humans did. Now, let's just imagine for a second how different the world would be if, instead of focusing on those vague, debatable 6 verses, Christianity focused on the actual words of Jesus. Like love thy neighbor, judge not lest ye be judged, blessed are the meek, care for the poor, heal the sick, welcome the stranger. Things that are very, like, honestly, like 1990s when you go knock on your neighbor's door and you're running around the streets with your best friends and like life was peaceful and like you'd go ask your neighbor if they had some extra milk for whatever you're baking. That's the vibe that that's giving me. I don't really remember the part where he said, and most importantly, make sure 2 dudes don't kiss at Target because I hate that for them. Like, Jesus never said that. I mean, he would have said it very differently if he did, but he still never said it. It's not in there. And people will try to argue, well, Jesus supported traditional marriage. Did he? Or did he simply exist in a traditional society? Jesus also walked everywhere and wore sandals, apparently. Are we required to do that too? Because my feet say absolutely not. Just because something was common at the time doesn't mean it was a divine instruction manual. It means it was the cultural norm at the time. Huge difference. Honestly, the Bible is less of a fixed rule book and more of a historical scrapbook that's mixed with poetry, law, propaganda, letters, and some very unhinged dream sequences. So, why we decided to use it as a rigid, literal, one size fits all guide for modern life is beyond me. You don't run a brand new iPhone 17 or whatever generation it is using 3rd century instructions. And yet, that's what people have been trying to do with morality and really lifestyle. Part 4: Religious trauma, internalized shame, and the price of a bad translation. Now, let's move away from the dusty scrolls for a minute and talk about the real life impact of this nonsense. Because this isn't just academic, it's personal, it's emotional, and it's very heavy. So many queer people grew up in churches hearing that they were an abomination, that their existence was a sin, that their love was counterfeit, that their bodies were wrong, and that their desires were demonic. Some people were sent to conversion therapy, some were kicked out of their homes, some tried to pray themselves straight, some got married to the opposite sex just to survive, some stayed closeted for decades, some never even got the chance to discover who they could have been. And that is so scary to me and so sad that people lived a full life till their dying day not being who they were authentically. And a lot of those people that tried to hide it did not survive at all. That's the part that makes this more than just a theological debate. That's blood on the hands of misinterpretation. That's trauma caused by theology. When a child believes that God hates them, that doesn't just disappear. It burrows into the nervous system. It becomes anxiety. It becomes depression. It becomes self-sabotage, addiction, shame, hyper-independence, self-doubt, all of the things. And do you know how hard that is to unlearn? I talked about rewiring your brain, one of my very first episodes, and creating new habits. Imagine unlearning this hatred that you have built into yourself. It's hard enough for me to rewire my brain to make my bed every morning, let alone undoing decades of religious harm. I think about my own experience. I didn't grow up in a religious family. I will likely do an episode about my exploration of spirituality. But there are times when, like, this might be TMI, but like if I'm having sex with someone, obviously a man, or like if I'm watching porn, obviously gay porn, that there is this little hint sometimes of guilt that creeps in because my whole life, being bullied and being told that being gay is wrong and people making fun of me and just making me feel bad for being me when I'm in those moments of sexuality, of gay sex, there's some sort of neural pathway, some little connection in there that is still attached to that guilt and to that 16-year-old me that didn't want to be gay. And that's like not even with religious influence. So I cannot imagine how terrible it would feel to grow up going to church 1-2 times a week, being told that who you are is a sin, that you're going to go to hell, and believing in all these negative things about yourself and then being an adult and being like, fuck, like trying to unlearn that? Can't imagine. Like if I feel guilty enough when I watch too much porn, can you imagine what somebody feels like that grew up in like a very strict Christian family? I can't even put myself in those shoes. You can know logically that something isn't true, but still feel dirty for existing. That is what trauma does. And religion has been one of the largest sources of trauma for queer people across generations. And yet, somehow, we are still here. We still love, we still create, we still dance and build families, we still make art, we still show up, and we still survive and keep pushing forward, which honestly might be the most divine thing of all. Because if God is real and God created people, and queer people exist everywhere across all cultures and all of history, then what does that say? Either God is extremely bad at designing humans, or queerness is part of the design. And I don't think God is sloppy. If I believed in that God, I believe in the universe, but like, let's pretend I'm like a believer in God who built the planet. He can't be that sloppy. Maybe queerness was never a mistake. Maybe the fear of it is the mistake. That's something that modern progressive churches and queer theologians have started exploring more openly. There are queer pastors, queer priests, queer rabbis, queer spiritual leaders who are reclaiming the text and saying, actually, this story includes us. And I'm really hoping to talk to them on some upcoming episodes because I think that would be very eye-opening for a lot of people. They're going back to the original languages. They're studying historical context. They're re-examining the scriptures. They're decentering straight colonial interpretations, and they're asking better questions. And suddenly, the Bible gets a lot bigger and a lot more interesting, a lot more loving, and a lot more inclusive. But as we know, those voices don't make headlines nearly as much or as loudly as an angry pastor on the corner holding a sign that says, "You're going to hell," in all caps with flames painted on it. If you haven't seen that, let me tell you, I have, especially at pride events. Which, quick side note, if you're truly following a loving God and your main message is hate and fear, I'm pretty sure you missed the plot. Part 5. From Pulpits to Politics, How Scripture Became a Weapon Against Queer People. All right, now that we've unpacked ancient texts, mistranslations, and centuries of human mischief, let's fast forward to the modern era because that's where things get extra messy. And honestly, it's kind of hilarious in the way only human stupidity can be hilarious. So, history tells us that Christianity has always had a love-hate relationship with power. And by love, I mean cling to it like your life depends on it. And by hate, I mean everything that challenges it is obviously demonic. Queer people, big red flag. Threatening the system? Absolutely. Loving in ways that don't reinforce patriarchal control? Hell yes. A walking crisis of authority? Ding, ding, ding. It's a very confusing relationship. Let's look at the 20th century, where things really got interesting. This is post 1946 Bible translation. Remember, when the word homosexual officially gets dropped into scripture. Suddenly, churches and political operatives discover a new, shiny way to stir up moral panic. Tell everyone that God hates gays and watch people line up for guidance like it's a sale at Nordstrom. Cue the anti-gay legislation. Cue the conversion therapy movement. Cue family values rhetoric. Cue TV pastors with private jets explaining why you are destined for hell if you like the wrong human. The Bible suddenly wasn't just a spiritual guide, it became a political weapon. It was rewritten in action, not just text, and it was terrifyingly effective. And really, it all goes back to the money. Follow the money. Think about it. Fear is a powerful motivator. If you can convince a population that being queer is a sin so serious it's an existential threat, suddenly the politicians, the pastors, and pundits are heroes that are saving morality. And the queer community? Perfect scapegoat. We're loud, we're visible, we're hard to erase, and apparently the embodiment of evil in God's plan. And spoiler alert, we're fabulous as fuck instead. Don't even get me started on the Reagan era in the US. Those political campaigns used religion like a seasoning, sprinkle a little God says no into legislation, whip people into a frenzy, and suddenly morality policing was law. The AIDS crisis? a moral crisis, not a public health emergency, according to certain corners of televangelism. That's not divine judgment, friends. That's politics wrapped in holy robes. Deliciously cynical if you can even stomach it. And I wasn't alive back then, but I imagine they used the AIDS crisis as a way to say, see, God doesn't like the gays, so he's killing them off. And for those that were extremely religious, that is all the proof that they needed. Now, you might be thinking, okay, fine, but what about today? Isn't this changing? And I think yes, slowly, but the echoes of this rewriting and weaponizing are everywhere. Look at the laws in different countries, the church debates, the debates in families over traditional values. The Bible isn't inherently anti-LGBTQ, but centuries of translation choices, mistranslation, selective interpretation, and yes, political opportunism have made it seem that way. And we're really all just butting heads here over whether being gay is a sin or not. Well, those pastors are still flying around on their private jets. And here is the kicker. The people most afraid of queer existence aren't afraid because we are morally corrupt. They're afraid because we refuse to conform. We refuse to obey an outdated template of gender and sexuality. We show them that love isn't something you control, it's something that you live. That's terrifying to an authoritarian system. The queer community is inherently radical because we exist authentically in a world that wants to define us and wants to put us in two very specific boxes. And we say, no, there's an unlimited amount of boxes that we can live in. So what do we do with all of this? First, I choose to laugh and laugh a lot. The absurdity of centuries of human incompetence is ridiculous. If you can't laugh at it, you might cry, and that's okay too. Second, educate. Understanding the history of translation, context, and manipulation gives you power. Knowledge is literally freedom. And third, reclaim. Whether it's your spirituality, your own body, or your own life story, you have the right to redefine what sacred and moral means to you. Because here's the truth. No misinterpreted text, no fearful preacher, no politician wielding a Bible like a sword, holding it upside down, pretending he's ever read it, gets to decide your worth. That power belongs to you. And I always think on my deathbed, what am I going to look back at? You're not going to look back on your deathbed. If you are someone religious and struggling with their sexuality, you're going to go, oh, I'm so glad I followed Jesus till I'm here on my fucking deathbed. You're going to look back and be like, I should have lived my life authentically and truly. And the people that love you will stick with you. And the people that don't, they can kick rocks. You will find people that support you, that get you, that love you, that believe in what you believe in, and will be your chosen family, your support system. Just because your mom, your aunt, your uncle, your sister, your brother, whomever might think that you are a demon, a sinner, you're going to hell because you might be a part of the LGBTQ plus community, they don't belong with you. They don't get you. But you will find the people that do when you start living authentically. And you can still believe in God and Jesus and go to church. You just find one that accepts us. And truly, that's one of the most liberating things that you can realize, that you are, in every sense, the author of your own story. No ancient committee needed, and no translation from the 1940s. You do you. Part 6, reclaiming faith, love, and laughter. All right, we've traveled together from ancient scrolls to modern televangelists, from mistranslations to political weaponization, from Sodom to social media comment sections. And now it's time to take a deep breath and maybe pause, go hydrate a little bit if you haven't already. And let's talk about the part that nobody ever mentions in Sunday school: reclaiming your power, your faith, and even your sense of humor. Because here's the deal. You've been sold a story that you're broken for existing if you are an LGBTQ plus person who has gone to church. You've been handed a text rewritten by a series of humans who, frankly, were not always the brightest crayons in the box. And maybe, for a while, you believed it. Maybe you carried shame in your body, and maybe you prayed in silence and begged a God who never once said that you were broken to fix something that wasn't broken to begin with. And I suppose this next part really does apply to anyone who is religious, has read the Bible, and thinks that being a homosexual is a sin. There's good news in all of this. The narrative that oppresses you is not immutable. It's not divine, it's human. And humans, again, spoiler alert, are pretty bad at running the universe. Case in point, Donald Trump getting elected. Come on, you see what I mean here. unless you think he's the second coming Jesus or whatever some people think. So, what do you do now? You reclaim. You reclaim the stories, the texts, the rituals, the symbols that were once used to control you, and you make them your own. If you want to light a candle and pray to God or the universe or your cat, do it. If you want to celebrate Christmas with a rainbow twist, a glitter twist, or a tequila twist, do it. If you want to read scripture critically and laugh at the fact that someone actually outlawed shellfish, but not homophobia, do it. You're allowed to do you. Life is flexible, and let's be real. Humor is your first weapon. Laugh at the absurdity. Laugh at the selective reading. Laugh at the people who think a 3,000-year-old mistranslation can dictate your existence in 2025. That laughter is not disrespectful. It's freedom. It's joy. It's a middle finger to centuries of oppression. And honestly, it feels pretty good. Then comes love. Love for yourself first, because if you don't reclaim your own worth, the world won't give it to you. Love your body, your heart, your queerness, your flaws, your talents, your rage, your creativity, all the things that make you you. Love others who are also reclaiming themselves, but don't make their acceptance a prerequisite for your survival. And love even the Bible if you want to, but with eyes wide open, understanding its history, context, and human interference. And finally, faith. Not faith as obedience, not faith as fear, not faith as a weapon, but faith as personal power. Faith that you can exist fully, that you can love fully, that you can create fully, that you can forgive, but also, when necessary, fiercely protect your joy. Faith is the divine spark inside of you, whether you call it God, the universe, energy, chaos, or just me and my own damn self. Personally, I talk to the universe. Sometimes I pray. Sometimes if I'm on a flight and there's a little bit too much turbulence, I'm like, please, God. When I say God, I'm referring to the universe. I believe in energy. And I really do think, I do full moon ceremonies and I try to manifest and I speak to the universe. But when I'm speaking to the universe, I think that I'm speaking to the same God or being or higher energy or power that the people at church are talking to down the street. They just have a different name for it, a different viewpoint. But I really think in the end, we're all speaking to and believing in the same thing, the same energy. And so here is really the takeaway from all this. The Bible, like all texts, is what humans make it. And humans have historically made it messy, oppressive, and a bit ridiculous. But you can make it liberating. You can make it joyous. You can make it funny. You can make it inclusive. You can take back what was twisted, misused, or weaponized and turn it into a tool for love, resilience, and authenticity. So next time someone tries to weaponize scripture against you, just smile. They're citing centuries of human error, and you are living proof that love and truth can survive mistranslation. So sit with that. Marvel at it. Write about it, paint it, dance it, and above all, live it. Be queer, be free, and be in your feelings. Because at the end of the day, the longest running group project in history may have been messy, but your life and your story is entirely yours. I tell everyone, I'm like, you can do anything you want to. Don't hold yourself back because of one small negative belief in yourself. I guess my point in really all of this and all of Hot Air, but specifically this episode, is if anybody listening, as I kind of mentioned before, feels not great about themselves based on their religion or the religion that their family has instilled in them, maybe give this episode a few listens. It's one of those things that history is very hard to digest sometimes. There's a lot of information in there. But my whole point in doing this episode is not to shame religious people or to make anybody feel badly about the God that they believe in, but instead to uplift those and maybe open up a door for any queer people that are struggling, or maybe parents somewhere who also grew up religious and have a child who is a part of the LGBTQ plus community and they are struggling to accept them. Understanding the facts, when you lay it down plain and simple, it's going to make it easier for us to be a little bit more flexible, be a little bit more open to change and evolution, and really just love and acceptance. And it's so important to remember, we are fighting each other all the time. The little people, the ones who vote and pay taxes, we are like on two separate sides right now, and religion has become a really big part of being on the right, being Republican, depending on how far you go. And on the left, we're a little bit more free and spiritual and whatever. But again, we're all talking to the same God. We all just want to pay our bills. We want to have love and live and believe what we want to without having to push it upon others. So be you, be a badass, celebrate whatever God or energy or universe that it is that you want to. And just remember that over history, things get a little bit twisted and you're allowed to rewrite your own story. Cue the applause, cue the confetti, cue your inner queer Jesus doing a victory dance. And I think that's where we're going to wrap up today's episode. So I hope you learned something. I certainly did. I'm very much looking forward to diving deeper into religion for the month of December. And again, follow me on Instagram and TikTok at _hotairpod. Visit my website, hotairwithjoshuarobert.com, to submit your listener stories and topic suggestions and shop my merch. Your boy needs you to support the show because life is expensive out here. And that, my friends, is Hot Air. Again, I'm Joshua Robert, and I will see you next Tuesday.